Now I will hand over to Dr. Shahood. He will moderating the webinar. I think in 1 or 2 minutes we can start. I think the people are joining. So
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
What you will suggest, like if someone wants to start this thing as a career, like to collect the post-consumer waste and everything. So of course we will have question at the end, like about traceability, how we will make sure everything
Like,
like that.
what do I think about it if someone wanted to start a career?
Yes, to start this business. How much you will spend?
Excuse me?
Yes.
I would say that, there's probably been no better time to start a career in this business. I've never been more optimistic, but waste management in general is difficult. So you have to have a certain amount of resources, a certain amount of hustle, and a certain willingness to connect the dots in unique ways.
Okay, perfect. So once again, Mr. Adam, thank you very much. Thank you very much officially to give us the time and to give us some information. And for the audience, I can introduce a little bit about Mr. Adam. He's the founder of Wearable Collections, and he's the Chief Recycling Officer in RTV, Return to Vendor. And today he will give some information on challenges and opportunities in establishing the supply chain of textile waste and recycling. So for the audience, if you want to ask some question, you can type the question in a chat, and at the end of the presentation, we will discuss with Mr. Adam. So over to you, Mr. Adam.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm a lot more comfortable. I love to have dialogue versus talking to people, but I think it's important for obviously you guys don't know me, so I think it's important for me to tell my story, and I think the story is very important component of the organicness of the path that I've taken. I never dreamed about being a clothing recycler. That's not what I was thinking about when I went to college. I never saw this career path as a path for myself. So it's been a lot of surreptitious, sort of random events that have led me down this path. So I hope that people learn some lessons from this, and also I look forward to having a dialogue afterwards. So I'll give a brief presentation, and then I'd love to talk more afterwards. So I call this presentation "Thinking Outside the Bin" because we have a phrase, thinking outside the box. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with the idea of thinking outside the box, but this industry was typically dominated in America by sort of outdoor bin collections placed in parking lots throughout the country. And I kind of came up with a unique / very local solution for clothing collections. It just happens to be in a very big locale, New York City. So when I think about waste management, a lot of it has to do with localness and really solving solutions for your locale. And one of the most interesting things about waste management that I've learned over 2 decades is that it's very formulaic. So a lot of things that you may be solving for your area are very translatable to other areas. And not only, and they go outside, and that goes outside clothing. Things that you solve for clothing can be very relatable and translatable for items like glass or plastics or paper. So I think waste management, each lesson you learn in waste management can have an effect on another form of materials. And that's been the part that's really excited me and kind of kept me in the clothing recycling game for so long. Clothing is very unique because it can't be commingled with the rest of the waste stream, because obviously if you put clothing with other waste streams, it's going to destroy the value of the reusable clothing. So you can learn a lot of lessons with clothing, And there's the other things about clothing is that people have a nostalgic attachment to it. They've lived their lives in clothing. And so sometimes when people give me clothing, they want to tell me a story about the life that they lived in those clothing and how it hurts them to get rid of the clothing. So what I've found is that those lessons that you can learn with clothing are very translatable to other materials. And I think that clothing is really undervalued in that regard, the clothing recycling industry. So, you know, it's something that I've dedicated my life to for two decades. And I think we're just starting on the path of real solutions. So let me tell you a little bit about my story. I am the founder and CEO of Wearable Collections, a New York-based clothing recycling company. Mind you, I called this clothing recycling in 2004. In America, clothing collections have been dominated by charities. So my company is not a charity. It is a for-profit that at the beginning dedicated a portion of our proceeds to a partnering charity. And that was part of our model. I don't know if you could see me right now or the screen, but this is a picture of me back in the late 90s. I was a day trader, and right next to me, there's a picture of my friend Ethan Ruby. He was one of my best friends. So I was a day trader in the early internet bubble around the 2000s. That means I traded stocks just for myself. I had an account and I traded stocks for myself. I never worked for a major company. This was it was a thing when the internet was becoming what it was. And that was, you know, Ethan was my best friend and a partner in my day trading firm. Oh, sorry. Jumped ahead really far. I'm not exactly sure what's happening to my presentation. I'm going to wing it a little because it jumped a little far. I don't know what's happening. So Ethan was my best friend and partner in my day trading firm. And on a fateful night, Ethan was crossing the street in New York City and was hit by a car and paralyzed. And I spent a lot of time helping Ethan recover from that accident. He, you know, spent a year recovering, and we got heavily involved in raising funds for spinal cord research. And because we were business partners, like we had that alignment. We liked to do business together. And so in 2004, another part of my story is that I had traveled to Chile and met a gentleman who was in the used clothing trade. He was running a sorting facility based out of New Jersey. He had told me about the opportunities in used clothing. And I was already a day trader and plenty busy. But when my friend was hit by a car, I was thinking about other things besides business. And so one day I saw a bag of clothing being left on the floor of my Manhattan building that has about 300 residences in that building. And I thought, this really doesn't make sense. It doesn't really make sense for a truck to come around and pick one bag up at a time. It's very inefficient. And that bag was left on my hallway for probably 2 or 3 weeks. And that was sort of my light bulb moment where I thought maybe we could place bins inside of buildings in New York. A building is a community in and of itself. And if we do this, we'll make it super convenient for people to donate their clothes, just like they do in the suburbs where they have these bins that they drive up to and donate their clothes for charity. And this is a very, very grassroots, very organic. I asked my building manager, can I place a bin inside here? And then I asked my friends, do you think you could get a bin inside your building? And really the only idea here was to start a project to help my friend get back on his feet, so to speak, and raise money for spinal cord research, a project and an event that was very near and dear to my heart at that point. And so we got into 5 buildings, we got into 10 buildings, and it was really an interesting project at that time. My early observations were that this was a project that people wanted to support. Building managers were very protective of their space in their buildings. In Manhattan and in New York City, space is very, everyone likes to say that there's no space. One of the things I would go into buildings and they said, we have no space for this gigantic bin. And I said, walk me around. I'll find some space. There's always a corner where you can put a bin, someplace that's accessible for the residents, but out of the way for the building so that it's not really an obstacle. One of the things I've learned, like I never was in the business of logistics, that managing a route of only a few buildings spread throughout a very big city is very inefficient. By calling it textile recycling, we had struck a nerve with the public and the media, who were very used to the concept of donating clothes, but not recycling. So this was almost a new term at the time when we came up with this idea, because people were just more familiar with the idea of donating clothes, not recycling clothes. Utilizing some technology, this was 2004, remember? So we had a basic website with a form to request a bin for your building. This was really a great lead generator where the sales came to us versus having to go door to door. And hard to believe, but we did start this company around the same time that Google was started. So we had it was very fortuitous, and we were very lucky to be a very high ranked business on Google, dominating the term clothing recycling. And I think it's important for everyone to remember that it was 2004. And when I say Pre-Inconvenient Truth, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with the film, but there was a movie that came out around 2006, 2007. It was the Vice President of America, Al Gore, who came up with this film. And it really was an eye-opening film that sort of began the mainstreaming of the sustainable movement. There was definitely people involved in recycling for a long time. But this film really showed us what kind of path that we were on as a society, and some of the things that we really needed to work on and fix in order to avoid existential damage to the planet. When I started this company, there really wasn't a whole lot of information and data on textile recycling. It was just starting to come out, these types of reports. One of the things about clothing, as I've mentioned before, is that it does need to be kept separate, and it had been dominated by charities in the past. And so charities don't really have to report to the municipal governments. And so this was the beginning of sort of raw data that was coming out, that textiles were taking up nearly 6% of our landfill space. In New York alone, 400 million pounds of textile waste. Nationally, Americans generate 25 billion pounds of textile waste, and only 15% was kept from the landfill. 85% was going to the landfill. So that's around 70 pounds per person going to the landfill, which I don't know, like, I started this as a project, but when I started seeing these numbers, I was struck by the problem and, as an entrepreneur, the opportunity, to tell you the truth. As I had mentioned, the film Inconvenient Truth came out around 2006, the mainstreaming of the sustainable movement, which raised the public conscious on the damage we were inflicting on the environment. And the realization, we were running a green company. When I watched it, I said, you know what? Every pound we keep out of the landfill is keeping one in circulation. So although I was calling it clothing recycling, and historically it was called donations, it struck a nerve in my brain that it was like, we're doing something that might be considered green. And this was 2006. So our approach was creating innovative hubs of collections. At first, we started with residential buildings, but it moved on to wherever we believed that people would centralize and definitely where neighborhoods would come together. And that led us to do collections at the New York City green markets. And these are the farmer markets where we have a network of 61 farmer markets that farmers from a radius of 250 miles come and sell fresh produce to New Yorkers. And it's a great network of people. And I met one of the directors at a green event in 2006, 2007. And I thought, well, what if we start collecting clothes at the green markets? Maybe people can bring their clothing there. And these are central, they're pop-ups. They pop up once a week. And, you know, one of the cool things about clothing is it doesn't really go bad. So people can hold on to it for at least a week. And these have turned into an incredible waste diversion center. I also thought, what about, you know, schools and universities? People go to the schools every day. This is where parents in a community get together every day. So what if we put bins in schools or do drives with schools and maybe help raise funds for schools through the collection of clothing? Universities, we do a lot of end of the year collections. I'll just thumb through this. These are the bins that we would place inside of. This is kind of the evolution of the bins. We started with the one on the left and then slowly moved on and evolved to steel bins, the one that you see on the right that have pretty good branding, information. They're education centers, but also places for activation. And that's something that's very central to what I do is every activation has to have a bit of an educational component to it. We're currently operating in around 200 residential buildings throughout New York City. What I've found is that residential buildings you really need a density, you need a volume. And in New York City, it takes a lot of time to go into a building and unload a bin. So while they're very convenient and the residents love it, it's difficult business as far as getting enough volume to pay for the day. And mind you, there's a lot of traffic in New York. You never know when something's happening. There's a parade, a president coming to the UN that's going to stop traffic for miles. So running a logistics company in New York, tickets from police officers who don't want you double parked. There are a lot of logistical hurdles that we have learned along the way. So I love it. It was the residential buildings are a calling card for us, but it is a difficult and not necessarily hyper efficient way to collect clothes, just basically because of the volume per time frame. I don't have a photo. The photos aren't coming through for some reason, some of my JPEGs, but this would have been a photo of the green markets. They have a bunch of farmer stands with a bunch of tents selling anything from produce to locally made jelly. And they're super well received markets throughout the city in hubs of 61 neighborhoods. And we at our height pre-COVID, we were collecting at 31 of these weekly green markets. They're just amazing communities. They have tons of foot traffic. And, you know, it was one of the best ideas I came up with was to have people bring the clothes to us versus having to place bins inside of buildings and having to service one at a time. But they're both, you know, what I found is that it's great to have a holistic approach, and this works for some. Our university and school drives where we tell parents to, you know, once a month or once a week, or even we place bins inside of schools where we say, bring the clothes, and the parents bring it in the morning. And by early morning, we've already unloaded the clothes into our truck and gotten it out of the way. It's a very, very efficient form of waste management. Anywhere where people congregate on the regular is a place that waste management can be done. The large bins you see are actually outside bins on university campuses. What I've found at universities is that during the course of a year, we get a decent amount of clothes and there's a decent amount of traffic, but really it's more the move outs. When the students move out, we have a semester series, like 2 semesters, one in the fall and one in the spring. And it's at the end of those semesters where students unfortunately leave a lot of clothes in their closets. And I work with the facilities management teams to make sure that none of those clothes enter the landfill. I also love to do fun events where I think there are going to be centrally congregated people, or where there's going to be a bunch of clothes. So that picture you see on the top was the idea us to clean up the New York City Marathon, which happens in November. In November, it's pretty cold in New York. These people are about to run 26 miles. So they have to show up early. And the marathon actually starts on Staten Island, and then they run through all the boroughs of New York City. Right from Staten Island, they go over a bridge and they enter Brooklyn. At Staten Island, they have to get there at anywhere from 3 to 5 o'clock in the morning, because all the roads are closed that morning in New York City. So they have to take buses. So these people get there super early. It's very cold in the morning, but are about to run a 26-mile race. So a lot of clothes is shed right at the starting line. And I had heard that that was a problem. So where I hear a problem, I like to try to come up with a solution. So I got a big team of employees / volunteers, and we were able to divert 30,000 pounds. Mind you, once the runners go through there, New York City tries its fastest to open up the transport lanes. So we have about a 3-hour window to collect as much clothes as possible, and we've been able to collect 30,000 pounds in a 3-hour period that has been shed at the New York City Marathon. We also love to do different stuff with artists and students, anything that we believe will raise awareness to the problem of textile waste. We do corporation drives. The one on the bottom is in Times Square with the Broadway Green Alliance. Well, we love partnering and collaborating with anyone who would like to help their community divert clothing waste. Okay, so Wearable Collections is a front-end collector. We come up with creative hubs of collection. What do we do with all the clothes? Well, clothing is treated like a commodity. We bring our clothes to a sorting facility. I'm not associated per se with the sorting facility, but I have a great relationship with them. They are a client of mine. They pay me a market price. And at that point, really the clothes is off my hand, but I choose to have very tight relationships with the sorters that I work with, because I love to, there are other opportunities, I believe, coming from their perspective, and I love to educate even them on what the new opportunities will be. These sorting facilities break down the materials into as many as 200 different grades, depending on the quality and type. The vast majority of reusable clothes is destined for markets abroad, such as Central America, South America, Africa, and the Caribbean. And that's with the people that I currently work with. The breakdown of this commodity of used clothing, of a perfect, untouched bag of clothing that I get from a donor, is that about 45% can be reused as usable clothing. About 30% is going to be used as rags and wiping cloth. And about 20% is going to be converted to low-grade fibers, such as carpet padding, insulation, and other stuffing type of material. Clothing and textiles are a unique value proposition in the waste piece. There's no subsidies. The government, this has been dominated by charities over the years. The government doesn't help. Municipalities do not help us. They don't give us any money to do a waste management. We have to make enough money from the collection of clothes to cover the cost. I wrote, it sounds obvious, but you know, other industries are you get municipal support, and they make up the difference of the waste management. There is no fees to have clothes taken away. Even though I believe, there should be potentially, but no, really, it's stuck in its own silo of having to create enough value from the collections to pay for the cost of the collection. Weathering a down cycle, something that a lot of my peers don't really understand in New York that just work in whatever type of service industry they work in or whatever industry they happen to work in, is they don't really deal with, they're not dealing with commodities. And if you stick around long enough in a commodity business, you're likely to see a down cycle. And that's based off of supply and demand. It's based off of strength of the dollar, weakness of the dollar. And as a small business, you really don't know. It's really hard to predict this. You just kind of find out when the clients are like, we don't want to pay you that anymore. And you see that, and then you see the trend of it, and you're like, oh, something must be going on in a macro level. It's not really, you can't really look up on a website and see the value of clothing. This is it's an insular business that, no one really goes out there and markets their sorting facility. They have very tight relationships, and it's a little dark. It's a little bit of it's not a black market, but it's a very dark industry. And people try to keep their relationships close to their selves. So an interesting thing I learned along the way is, even though I'm in a volume business, I get paid per pound, but if I don't have good enough quality, if I don't stay within that industry range of 45% being reusable, because it is the reuse of secondhand clothes that has driven the value of clothing recycling over these years. If I don't stay within that industry standard of 45% of my loads being good enough to match those numbers, the client doesn't want to buy my load. That's what their metric is based off of. So this is something that a lot of people don't understand about from the outside, don't understand about my business, is that it's not just collecting garbage, textile waste. No, I actually have to manage the fact that we're collecting it in good areas from people that I'm communicating the messaging with, that we need a certain amount of secondhand clothes. It's not, calling it recycling was an amazing thing. It was very fortuitous in certain ways. But some people say, here, let me bring my good stuff to the charities and let me bring my clothing to be recycled, my worn out clothing to you. Now, if that's all I received, I don't have a business. So I need to stay within that industry standard in order to stay alive. Like any business, you have to stay very flexible and be able to modulate when different ideas and experiences pop up. I love to educate the public with outreach at the markets, and telling them that this is important. It's important that people know why I need quality. It is because it's the reuse of secondhand that drives this. It's important that people know that they're getting educated along the way. They're not just blindly putting things into bins and hoping for the best. We have a term for that. We call that wish cycling. So I'd rather be educating. Every time someone gives me a bag, I want people to have a little bit more understanding about the movement of materials and the management of materials and the value of materials. While people understand the value of clothing, they might not understand the value of a cup that they drink their coffee in. But really, both those things would come from raw materials that were harvested, that we need to maximize the use of each of these materials that we consume our products in. I've been in this business since 2004, and talking about, it was kind of clear the damage that the fashion industry was having to me. But really, it wasn't until around 2017 that it became a little bit more public, a little bit more mainstreaming about the damage that the fashion industry was doing to the environment. It had come out that fashion was the second most pollutive industry in the world. Now, people debate that. because I think these aren't really hard numbers, and it depends, you know, to what level you're thinking about, and if you incorporate all the phases of, you know, energy uses, transportation, you know, you may get different analysis from different people. That doesn't really matter whether it's number 2, number 5, number 10. Fact is, fashion is it's a very pollutive industry, and one that we can do a better job with. And it's one that we can learn a lot of lessons from that translate to other industries. You know, part obviously is cotton production, the water that goes into the cotton production, rivers that are polluted from the dyeing methods, and industry just dumping that into. Now, all of these things are improving, obviously, once we've learned the problem, but I don't even think the mainstream or the world really knew about the issues until around 2017. So this is still a very recent awareness that's been brought amongst the fashion community and the consumers. The labor that goes into the fashion industry. You guys may have a different perspective being from Pakistan, but this is really glossed over in America. And there's been a race to the bottom by fast fashion. And, you know, like we have a minimum wage here, and only can these garments be produced at a certain price by outsourcing them and not paying people in these foreign lands that the same price that these companies would need to pay if it was made in America. So people need to be understanding of that, because that's part of sustainability. It's not just environmental; it's also human and labor rights. This is a picture of me at a sorting facility, dealing with the uncommoditizable commodity. Like I said, it's not just the quantity of stuff. I'm not just bringing it. I need to bring a certain amount of quality. There's a large variety of materials in the load. Textiles can be clothing. Textile collections typically incorporate shoes, linens, curtains. Even, you know, there's pillows, duvets, blankets. There's a lot of things in our daily lives that are made from textiles, furniture. And so when you place a bin somewhere, people feel very comfortable putting these types of items in bins. So trying to figure out different reuses and recycling directions for each of these is a very complex thing. There are blends in the fabric, something I've learned along the way, which is really the boogeyman is the blends. Blends make things very hard to break down. If something was just monomaterial, 100% cotton, we have a use for 100% cotton. If something was 100% wool, we have reuses for wool. It is because these things come in these aggregated loads, it makes it hard to separate. However, there are new technologies that are along the way that are separating materials by using a spectrometer. And, you know, one of the things we couldn't count on in the past is labels, even though labels supposedly say the material content within the clothing. First of all, it's very time consuming. Deconstruction is very time consuming. So when you mix these materials, if you have 100% cotton sweatshirt, but you have a metal zipper and you have plastic rivets on that sweatshirt, it makes it very difficult to separate those materials, or expensive to separate those materials in order to keep the value in them. So one of the things I'm obsessed with is monomateriality as a way out. But America used to recycle plastic and then, you know, dump it on countries like China. And the consumer had no idea really what was happening with our recycling. And really all it was exported. The waste was exporting, and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And, you know, when you rely upon that and then a country says, we don't want your waste anymore, that creates a backlog, it creates a problem, and it breaks the trust of the public. And recycling really demands trust of the public. In order for people to do the right thing, they need to trust that the proper things are happening with it from an industrial side. Reasons for hope. These are just several examples, and these were made a couple of years ago, but fashion committing to a circular economy. When I heard about the idea of a circular economy, it just struck me as something that made sense, just common sense. I don't look at the circular economy as basically, it's just something that it probably exists in less affluent countries already, maximizing the use of all the materials that are in their streams. And it's something that we've gotten very distant from in America, but really it's just a throwback to way the things used to exist, where we harvested things in natural ways, we created them in natural ways, and then they decomposed in natural ways. Even if we're using synthetics, there are ways to take responsibility for those synthetics and then use those synthetics as feedstock rather than letting them pile up in landfills. So when I heard about the circular economy, I just became obsessed with it, and utilizing and evolving my experience in waste management and the problems that I've seen handling used clothing has led me towards the path of trying to be an evangelist for the circular economy. And I'm just doing everything in my power to connect the dots to make the circular economy a real thing. And, you know, that basically is the circular economy is rather than treating something as waste, is looking at our products as raw materials for their next life. Designing things that they can be easily deconstructed or chopped up, melted, and recycled. Just thinking about the end of life at the beginning stages. And that's really not done so often. Companies think about things, they just think about products they want to make. They just think about what's going to be beautiful, what the public is going to desire to consume that they can feed down their throats. Well, you know, it's time that companies get aligned with thinking about the end of life, because they really haven't had to take extended producer responsibility in the past. They haven't been forced to, but there are laws coming around. There is existential crisis upon us that is forcing them to move in these directions. And I would just want to do everything in my power to help push this along. The future of wearable collections role in Clothing the Loop. Create post-consumer textile waste lab. Explore ways to maximize the value from the stream. Resale, reuse, recycle as a resource. Bring together various stakeholders, which I believe is a very important thing. This is not one, it's not going to be one segment of the industry that's going to solve this. This is going to take collaboration from municipalities, corporations, local groups. It's going to take everyone working together. It's going to bring together various stakeholders in a city known as the fashion capital of the world, NYC. Create space where artists, fashion designers, industrial designers, fashion students, textile scientists, and new technologies, robotics and sorting can be tested. All with an eye on breaking downstream into viable, scalable, reusable products. Open source this platform in conjunction with the stakeholders for improved communication and bringing items to market. That is the end of my presentation. This is something that we run with. It's kind of my tagline is clothing is not garbage. And that is, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Adam.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I don't know if you can you see me?
Not yet.
Let me see. Can you hear me? For some reason, let me see. Stop sharing. Yeah, I'm having trouble with my, I don't know, for some reason the camera is not turning on from this application right now. But I'm here.
Okay.
If anyone else wants.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we will have some questions. If someone want to ask some question, they can write in a message. So we will start discussion. So I have one question. You started with saying that your company is for profit, not for charity. That is normally considered for the waste cloth collection. So how
Yes.
you can how you can make this thing profitable and convert from charity in the people's understanding from charity to the profitable organization or profitable business?
So you're asking me like how to do that?
Yes, how we can like we can change them people's mind that okay, it's not the thing that you give your used clothes to the charity. It can be a business.
Well, I mean, that's the, it's been a hurdle. I can't believe I'm still talking about this 20 years after starting this company, but it's taken a lot of effort. And I think that that's, as I said, it takes a lot of collaboration with different stakeholders. Um, you know, companies are not charities like that. The companies that sell the clothing aren't charities. So, and in America, I mean, it, if plastic waste is not a charity, paper waste is not a charity. So, this just happened to, rag picking has been around since clothing has been around, right? And in America, the Salvation Army and Goodwills, these organizations started in the 1800s. So there's a long history of charity, giving your items to charity. But really, ultimately, charities are non-for-profits, and the way I look at it as an economics person is just that it's a different line item, and I would just like to say that there's many social enterprises, and so you just have to position the organization as a social enterprise. There's a lot of weight, and I mean, whether it's unfortunate or not. There's a lot of responsibility in the doing good. I like to say that I want to lead with you can do well, like you can make money by doing good. I think I want to see every corporation aligned with doing well, making money by doing good for people and the environment, right? People, purpose, and environment. So why I don't it's still befuddles me to this day that the responsibilities, there's all these responsibilities on companies that are trying to do good. Like you really can't make a mistake when you're trying to do good. But social enterprise is becoming more and more acceptable. And I think that you have to just be very clear with the messaging of the social enterprise that, waste management is itself doing good. Keeping items out of the landfill is itself doing good. Extending the life of materials, eradicating textile waste is doing good. You don't really need anything else on top of that.
Okay. So I have one question. They want to ask. It is from Mr. Wasim. They want to ask. Kindly let me know how much consumer willingness to pay to used and recycled clothing. Like if you want to convince people, what is you can say? What is the percentage of the people they are willing? They are saying yes, we will do this.
That are willing to buy recycled clothing?
Both sides willing to buy recycled clothing and the willingness to collect and give in your box. Maybe they have to walk like 10 minutes to reach to your box, something like this.
Yeah, they're very willing. I've seen people go very long distances and do very interesting things that surprise me in order to do the right thing. I mean, you know, New York has all different types of people and all different types of levels of affluence. Um, I do home pickups and I actually charge a fee. This is a post-COVID thing because, I mean, there's been a lot of issues for me as a New York City recycler post-COVID, but people were still demanding my service. So in order to counterbalance the risk I was taking by not understanding how much volume was coming from each location, I started to implement a $20 fee. So I've had thousands of paid customers to pay me $20 per pickup to pick up their textile waste. So, there's all different types, but I do believe that the best thing that someone can do from a recycling or collection perspective of any niche material is create convenient hubs of collection. Now, one of the most convenient hubs of collection has evolved into shipping. So there are many resale companies that have gotten into the game, that like a company like ThreadUp. I don't know if you're familiar with threadup.com, where it's a gigantic e-commerce resale site that people can send their used clothing to, and then ThreadUp will put it online for people to buy it. So it's like a gigantic e-commerce thrift store, let's say. And so ThreadUp will pay for people's shipping to the ThreadUp warehouse, right? And so couldn't really get more convenient than putting your stuff in a bag, leaving it for the mailman, and shipping it off. It's not really a great way, nor is it a cost-effective way to do it, but I assume ThreadUp has found a way to make money from that form of collection. If people want to get rid of volumes, it's not really the best way to handle volumes, but it is a way for everyone to participate in clothing reuse and recycling.
Okay. So I just want to ask from the audience. Can see some people, they are interested to ask questions. So it will be easy if you can please write a message in a chat. So it will be quick to get the question and answers. So meanwhile, I have another question. And they want to ask what you are seeing the future of cloth recycling, even when the transportation cost is rising day by day. For example, if you are collecting and then the expenses on the transportation and all these charges.
Yeah. So we could just focus on clothing recycling?
Yes.
So I've never been more optimistic. I'm an optimistic person, but I've never seen so many parties get involved, right? Like people are starting, first of all, just from an environmental and climate, we need solutions, right? So people are more supportive of solutions than they ever have been. People are more aware of the need for solutions than ever before. A lot of things are changing. COVID has changed a lot of things. It just seems like there's a movement to localize things versus, the globalization that was happening over the past 40 or 50 years. And so I think there's tremendous opportunities to come up with local solutions. And I think that's the way you don't really want waste to move around that far in general. So ideally, you're collecting from people and finding people in need not so far away. Like it doesn't really need to be shipped around the world, right? In order to find people that are going to reuse and recycle clothing. But what I'm also seeing is innovation on the recycling side. So like I said, there's many people who are trying to slice the reuse of secondhand business because there's a lot of people who understand the value, and companies themselves are now starting to enter the game of reuse and resale. And there's many technological companies that are providing companies with layers of solution that make it super simple for their customers to sell their brand on their site as a secondhand thing. So people are chopping the pie of secondhand and reuse in all these different ways. I've been obsessed with the other 50%, the other 50% that the sorters actually lose money on. It's the reuse of secondhand that drives the economics of all this. But that other 50% that's either going to be reused as rags or used as stuffing or insulation or carpet padding, that the sorters lose money on. So what I want to do is be part of the raising of the value of the materiality side of that other 50%. And if that happens, and if you connect the dots with innovation, then maybe the commodity price, since the commodity price is really based off just 50% of these items being reused, what if 100% of the load can be reused for more valuable means? Well, then the commodity price is more likely to go up. That is more likely to incentivize more people to keep items out of the landfill and more materials out of the landfill. So that's what I'm talking about aligning the doing well with doing good. And I think as these innovations come along, there will be more and more value of the materials that are in our streams of consumption. And there will be more and more incentive to keep them out of the landfill. And those transportation costs are actually hurting the virgin products more than anything right now. So I believe that maybe it will help recycling and recycled materials become on par with virgin materials. And that really is the battle that you're always going to have. If virgin materials are cheaper than recycled materials, then companies are always going to move towards the cheaper material, unless content within their products, which seems to be a trend and seems to be happening slowly, too slow for me, but it does seem to be happening.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to add with this previous question. So what do you think the like the reliability and durability of virgin products that you are already saying that bit cheaper as compared to the recycled products? And what is the people's acceptance rate? Like if I will say, okay, these are two products, one is the virgin one and one is the recycled. So people admits, and what are the actual markets? Like you sell them in the United States or you send them to South Africa or something like this, developing countries?
Well, we are now, so I'm on the collection side, right? And so we are now, thankfully, that there are innovations that are starting to come online at scale now. So we have, so I work very closely with my sorting partners, and we are now, for example, separating by material using a fiber sort machine. And so we are out of that bottom percentage of the hierarchy of the pyramid, we are preparing loads that can now be used as feedstock for different recycling companies that are beginning to scale. And so as you do that, they are, the price of those materials are starting to go up, and not tremendously, but, a couple of pennies in a volume business is a big deal. And these innovative companies they're making virgin-like materials out of them. So I see that this is just the beginning stage, and I believe that recycling materials are going to be on par with virgin materials in the not too distant future.
Okay, thank you very much. So I also have one other question. So when you are talking about the collection bins and like you are also saying that some online supply of the free delivery, something like this. So what do you think about the remote areas, like the countries like in Pakistan, Bangladesh, India? So they have the most of the population in the remote areas. So like if you talk about the New York, you can say, okay, I can put a one bin or two bin in a high-rise building. So
right.
when you will go towards the remote areas, so it will be more difficult. It will be more transport charges, more difficult to motivate the people. So how you will compare these things?
I think that ideally, one of the interesting things about waste management is that it's formulaic. So ideally, remote areas can, I think that there should be a certain type of handling of materials in certain regions, right? Like, I don't know, I'd have to go and really analyze it before I could say like how many miles. Like, there should be centers of recycling, and like every, I don't know, 100 miles, let's just say, or something like that. That's just reasonable, reasonable transport, right? Where someone could do a hub and spoke central collection, and then they can bring it to a recycling center. And I hope that some of these innovations of some of these technologies that make sense for some of these areas are deployed in some of these areas. That maybe they can shred industry within those regions, and clothes that is made for the types of people. It doesn't need to be centralized, corporatized, and run by a couple of brands. Why not have different local textile industries pop up in each of these areas that are supporting, the waste is then feeding the raw materials that is then being created by local people that understand the types of garments that the local people are going to wear, made with materials that make sense for each locale, and then with the recycling necessary, with the machinery necessary to take all of those in their second life and turn that back into a new material in the next life.
Okay.
Just a theory. Just a theory.
Yes, of course. There are so many things that is different with the practical.
Yeah.
So I also have one more questions. Like, you have the waste of different kinds. You already talked about the different, then you go for the sorting. So how you make sure that traceability of this type of mixing waste?
Of textile waste?
Textile clothing waste, yes.
Well, I mean, clothing and as like textile waste has been highly recyclable since I got into the game. It's a funny thing is, like, I learned from a sorting, like my partner was a sorter, and he had told me about the opportunities in used clothing collection. And when he broke it down, he said 97% of the stuff that comes through my doors is recycled in one way or another. And I thought, that's amazing. So, whether it is used, some people say downcycled, but if carpet padding or cushioning, all of these things, or items that are used in a car for acoustic dampening, shredded clothing and textile waste has been used for a lot of things. And, it replaces, in those particular markets, it's already replaces virgin materials. It's just that now we're trying to take what was considered downcycled materials and create more and more value from those materials. There's a lot of textile waste out there.
Yeah. So what do you think the processing or sorting cost as compared to the transportation cost? And if there is some possibilities to reduce this sorting cost, if you will move to the cheaper areas, like in the textile, we can say that all of the production in the cheaper areas of the world, like Africa and Asia. So what do you think, if you will move these sorting facilities or sorting processes toward these areas, it will be suitable, or like we are doing in the textile?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. Can I tell you, like, I'm not so hands-on with moving the stuff around the world. Like, I'm more a local part of the solution, and it's my sorting partners that deal with it. But sometimes when I ask them questions like that, like, what happens with this? Sometimes I get the answer, it goes to Pakistan, just so you know. Where the labor costs are lower, and that they have more respect for the materials, and they know how cost effectively to separate the shoes. And even if it's not a perfect match, because there's, for example, like a lot of single shoes, even if it's not a perfect match, they will match them by size and by color, manually. And, they'll use the leather. They'll chop it up and use the leather manually, because they'll make jewelry out of it or something like that. And so I think this question that you had already kind of happens. I think the question is more, how will those cheaper labor markets contend with the technology as it comes. Like there's going to be more and more robotics and technology that replace, and really does make a whole lot of sense when it comes to waste management, I think. Coming up with the ideas, okay, it needs humans, but I do think there's a lot of things where technology can replace humans, as far as doing the waste management side to more efficiently handle it. And so how will those industries in those different areas that you mentioned contend with technology as it comes online?
Okay, perfect. So we will have only last question. Quickly, you can answer in some minutes because we already have finished our time. So
yeah, I mean, I'm fine with answering questions. Yeah.
So how you can compare, like, if you are sorting and recycling some wearable clothing, especially, so
Yeah.
they are of course consuming some fossil energy. If we will talk about in terms of sustainability, so how
Yes.
we can compare? Do you have some comparative data that if you are producing the new clothing and you are recycling something, so what is the difference we got in terms of sustainability?
Yeah. So I might get yelled at for this. I run a lot of my trend forecasting and thinking, not necessarily based off of data as much as intuition.
Okay.
And my intuition is, if we could extend the life of materials that have already gone through the rigors of production and come up with more efficient ways of breaking them down rather than harvesting more raw materials, I believe it has to be a net positive. Now, of course, the thing is, you can always get like nitty gritty. You can get to the nitty gritty, we call it. And like, if someone's using a coal fired plant as the energy for their place and someone using wind energy or solar, there's going to be obvious benefits, but we could keep on breaking that down. Well, what did it take to generate the soul? So I try not to get lost in those weeds, because it's not my expertise. I try to read as much as possible, but I believe if you are keeping items locally, transporting them less, breaking them down with the proper type of energy methods, it's got to be better. Is my and frankly, the world doesn't have unlimited raw materials, so it's not necessarily a question of is it better or not. It's we have to figure out ways to better utilize the items that we extract from the earth.
Okay, perfect. So we will close from this question. Thank you very much again, because it was great pleasure to have some experience from the especially person who is doing this business instead of going for the theories. So we got a lot of actual information what is going on in the recycling business. So we will close here, and I
Yeah,
will say
thanks for
again,
having
thank you
me.
very much.
It's really a pleasure to be able to speak to so many of you in such a distant land, and hope that these messages and lessons are translatable.
Yes, of
To
course. Of course,
understand.
it is understandable for everyone here who is listening.
And just to, in passing, like I'm very active on LinkedIn. My name's Adam Baruko. And anyone who, I love to post the innovations that I see and my take on the innovations. And so I think my LinkedIn account is a very good place to follow if you're interested in following the innovations that I believe are happening in the textile recycling space.
Okay, perfect. So everyone, if you want to have some question, you can also contact on the LinkedIn,
Yes.
and
Feel free to.
hopefully we will get some answer.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Pleasure speaking to you guys.
Okay,
Have a great
thank you.
day.
Have a nice day, you too. Bye.
Bye.